Welcome everyone to our fifth video in this tutorial series about OpenGL ES. In this video, we will be moving the camera around in our OpenGL scene. In the previous video, we showed how we can move our object around in the scene, namely we were rotating one of our rectangles. In this video, we will not be moving the objects, however, we will be moving the camera around in the scene. We will split that into a movement in the horizontal plane and on the vertical plane, as we will see later. We will also be implementing the rotation of our camera around two axes, namely the X and Y axes. We will also add a reset button, so if we move the camera around a lot and then our scene has been lost, we can always reset to our default view. There are many ways to implement these translations and rotations in the scene. I have chosen to use the OnTouchListener of our OpenGL surface. I will bundle that with a gesture detector. I will be using the OnScroll method of the gesture detector to implement our code. We will add 4 buttons to the bottom of our activity. These 4 buttons are shown here, this picture. The first button will indicate that we are moving our camera in the horizontal plane. The second button is indicating that we are doing a rotation of our camera. The third button indicating that we are moving our camera up and down. And finally, the reset button, which will reset our view to the default values. So let's start coding. This is our program from the last tutorial where we have this rotating rectangle and this fixed or static rectangle. Let's start in this tutorial then by adding our new interfaces. So we will be implementing two interfaces. First, the view on touch listener, and then the gesture detector on gesture listener. Let's add the definition of these two interfaces. And now let's implement the required methods. For the gesture detector, there are multiple methods. We will be using mainly the onScroll method. And for the view on touch listener, we will be using the onTouch method. Let's now add a variable to hold our gesture detector. It's of type gesture detector and we call it mGesture detector. Now in the function onCreate, we create our gesture detector. It requires two inputs. We will put them to this. The first input would be the context and the second one is the listener. And remember, we implemented the listener interface in our activity. And that's why we are passing this pointer in both parameters. Now let's set the OnTouch listener of our view. Since we implemented this interface also in our activity, we'll be using this as an input here. Now, whenever an OnTouch event happens, the OnTouch method will be called. This is the OnTouch method of our view. And now in this OnTouch method, we need to pass the motion event to our gesture detector. Now, our gesture detector will interpret this event and call one of these functions here, which we implemented in our on gesture detector listener. So there are multiple of these functions like on down, on long press, on single tap, and so on. We will be using the onScroll function. For now, I will just add a log. Just to make sure that our logic is working now and we can test it. So let's go to the logcat. So we are not getting any messages that indicates something is going wrong. I think in the OnTouch event, yeah, here we need to return true to indicate that we already consuming the OnTouch event. Let's retry. So as you can see now, we are getting this onScroll event just by clicking and scrolling over this. So great. Let's now add our 4 buttons. For that, I already prepared some images. Let's first add the images to our resources. I will put them here in the drawable folder under resources. And this can be done by simply clicking new, then you choose vector asset, and then you can and then you choose local file, and then you can browse to the place where you saved your images. I will use a different approach now. I will open the drawable folder, which you can find in your application path. So I'm saving this application here in this folder called learn. And then you have the app, sources, main, resources, and then drawables. And then you can simply copy and paste the images here. So I already have these XML images. Of course, when you import vector assets here, you can import SVG files. The Android Studio will create these XML files for you and save them in this drawable folder. For now, as you can see here, these 4 images has been added to our drawable. So let's add these images to our main activity. For that, we go to the main activity, the layout. Remember now here we are looking at the source view of this main activity. We can switch to the design view, or we can actually split between source and design view. Let's first add the buttons using this design view. We will go here to buttons, and then we choose image button. Let's add only one button for now. It asks us which image we want to use for this button. So let's use this move image. As you can see, it's too large. We can resize it here. And of course, you can edit the properties of this image button also here to the right. Or sometimes, using the code view is faster than that. So let's go now to the code view, and this is our new button. I will call it move image button, and I will put the width and height to 75. And as you can see here, the resource is put to this drawable move image. However, the X and Y position has set to absolute values, and we don't want that. We want to constrain this view to our GL service view. So here I constrain the bottom of our image button to the bottom of the service view, and the start of this button to the start of the service view, and would place this button at the bottom left side of our activity, as you can see here. And now we need to fix the size of the image, and that can be done by using the fit center as our scaling type. Now if we switch back to the design view, you can see that our image here is like centered and fit into this button. Now let us quickly add the other 3 buttons to this view. I just copy pasted the code. You can see here I added the rotate button, same as before, width and height and fit center. I constrained it to appear to the right of the previous button. The same for the up and down, and also constrained to the left of the previous button, and so on. Now let's switch to the design view and see how this looks. So it looks exactly as we want. So we have the move button, rotate, up and down, and reset button. Let's now add the onClick event handling to these buttons. So in our Java code, in the onCreate function, we can now use the binding as before and search for our, for example, move button, and then set onClick listener. Of course, we can also use a lambda expression. Let me use the lambda expression. Whenever one of these buttons is clicked, I want to have a different use to our onScroll function. So for that, I will define a variable called input mode. Let me first define an enum, which will include our input modes. So our input mode can be move, rotate, or up and down. And to keep track with the current input mode, we use this variable current input mode, and we will initialize it to be move. We will also need a function. Let's call it set current input mode. I will put it below the onCreate. Whenever one of these 3 buttons, like move, up and down, and rotate, is clicked, we will call this function set current input mode with the corresponding input mode to change our current input mode. That sounds a little bit confusing, but believe me, it's not. Let's just now write the event handler for these 3 buttons. So as you can see, it's really straightforward. So when we click the move image, we set the input mode to move. When rotate is clicked, we set it to rotate. And when up or down button is clicked, we set it to up or down. Really straightforward. I will also add the onClick listener for the reset button. And for that, I will create a function called reset camera. To track the position and orientation of our camera, I will define 3 variables. The first one called camera position, and it will define the X, Y, and Z position of our camera. So I initialized here the Z value to -3. If you remember, this was the value which we used also in the previous tutorial as our default position of the camera. I also added 2 values here indicating the rotation of our camera around the X axis and the Y axis, and those are initialized to 0. The reset camera function is straightforward. We only need to reset these 3 variables to their default values, as you can see here. So 0, 0, and -3. And for the XY rotations, we also have the 0 value. And now we need to update the view matrix based on these three values. For that, we use the OpenGl function under the class matrix. So we will use two functions. The first one called setRotateEuler-M. This function is used to create a rotation matrix based on Euler angle. So here, our matrix is actually the view matrix, which we used in the previous tutorial, and we want the Euler angles to be the X and Y angles, which we defined here, and for the Z rotation we will be always using 0. The second function which we are using is translate M, so translate matrix, and again we apply it to the view matrix, and for the translation vector we use our camera position vector. That's all what we need to do in this reset camera function. Now in the set current input mode, we want to update our current mode and our button status based on the selected or clicked button. I already prepared the code and pasted it here. So as you can see here, we are defining two colors. One will be used for selected buttons and one will be used for the not selected buttons. So we have these three buttons at the bottom. Only one of them will be active at a time, and that will be indicated by a background color. So remember, we call this function set current input mode using an input mode variable which can be move, rotate, up and down. First, we want to set our current input mode, which is tracking the current input mode, to the parameter input mode. Then we need to change the background color of our buttons accordingly. For example, if we clicked on the move button, then we need to set the background of this move button to the selected color. If not, then we set it to the not selected, and so on for the other two buttons. And that's it actually for this function. Let's run and see what we have implemented till now. So as you can see, we have here the 4 buttons, and now we can click on any one of them. And as you can see, only one can be selected at a time. However, if you noticed at the beginning, the colors are not matching. To fix that, we need to call this set input mode method at the beginning. So in this onCreate function, we can here call the set current input mode, and we pass the current mode, which will be move in default. Now let's rerun. It looks better. So now we can see that the move mode is selected, and we can click. It looks more consistent as before. And of course, we can reset. However, now if we scroll up and down, nothing is changing because we have not yet implemented the onScroll event. So let's do that. So first thing we want to do in this onScroll event, we want to switch based on our current input mode and apply move, rotate, or up and down based on the current mode. So if we are moving in the horizontal plane, we will be changing the X and Z coordinates of our camera position. So to do that, I'm using the distance X and distance Y. These are input parameter to this onTouch function, as you can see here, and it tells us how much we have moved on the X and Y axis on the view. I'm normalizing that with the width and height of our GL view and then scaling it with a 10. This tells us how fast we want to move in this horizontal plane. So in the up and down, we are changing the Y coordinate, since the y-axis in OpenGL is actually the up and down axis, and we are using the same logic. However, here I'm using only the height, so one axis movement, since it's only up and down. For the on-rotate, we also use similar logic. However, here we change the X and Y angles, and I'm using a scaling factor of 30. I mean, these scaling factors can be changed based on your feeling. So we can run the program, and if we see that it's too slow, we can tune it up. If we saw that it's too fast, so the movement is too fast, we can tune it down. So now with this simple code, we have changed the position and orientation of our camera. So we only need now to change our view matrix based on these variables, as we already did in the onScroll function. So I will copy paste similar code here. So again, we are rotating our camera based on the X and Y angle, and we are translating it based on the camera position variable. That actually should implement our movement of the camera. Let's now run our program. Now, as you can see, our program runs by default in the move mode. So now if I clicked on the OpenGL surface and I moved up or down, so we'll be going closer. So here I'm moving up, closer to the objects, moving down, so that would be away from the object. So I can also move the camera to the left, so the object will appear to be moving to the right. The other way around when we move the camera to the right. Now rotation. So rotation on the x-axis, the y-axis. This doesn't look right. Now that's because I used an older version of this rotate OLRM. So if I use the newer one, also in the reset, and now I can rerun. So now if I rotate it on the y-axis, now this is the effect that I wanted, and on the x-axis, now we can go up and look down, for example. So if we don't see anything and we don't know how to go back to our view, we can always press this reset button. Now let me try to go up. So now if I look down, I should be able to see the rectangles from above. So that's all what I wanted to show in this video. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.